The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 stands as one of the most transformative yet often underappreciated conflicts of the 20th century. Fought between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan over influence in Korea and Manchuria, the war shattered assumptions that had long dominated global politics. For centuries, European empires operated under the belief that they were universally superior in military strength, industrial ability, and cultural power. When Japan, a nation that had only recently undergone rapid modernization, decisively defeated a major European empire, this belief was profoundly shaken. The war did far more than redraw borders. It reshaped the international balance of power, contributed to revolution in Russia, encouraged anti-colonial movements throughout Asia and Africa, and propelled Japan toward a new, assertive imperial role in international affairs. Japan's modernization and imperial ambition. Japan's rise as a modern power was the product of the Meiji Restoration of 1868, a political revolution that replaced the old feudal order with a centralized imperial government committed to national transformation. Observing how Western powers had forced China into submission during the Opium Wars, Japan's leaders understood clearly that industrial and military modernization was not a matter of prestige but of survival. Japan adopted Western military training systems, restructured its government bureaucracy, developed large-scale manufacturing and infrastructure, and built a powerful modern navy. In less than 4 decades, the nation had evolved from a secluded island state into a modern, industrial empire eager to assert itself. Japan's first major demonstration of its newfound power occurred during the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, where it defeated China and gained Taiwan and influence in Korea. However, Japan's victory was partially undone by the triple intervention of Russia, France, and Germany, which compelled Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula. When Russia soon afterward claimed and fortified Port Arthur for itself, Japan felt betrayed and humiliated. This resentment simmered beneath Japanese foreign policy for years, contributing directly to the decision to confront Russia when diplomatic negotiations later failed. Russia's expansion into East Asia. While Japan was rising, Russia was attempting to solidify its status as a global empire. The Russian leadership sought a warm water port on the Pacific that could be used year-round, something that its northern territories could not provide. The completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway in 1903 gave Russia the infrastructure to transport troops and supplies across the vast expanse of its territory to its holdings in the Far East. However, Russia's expansion was often slow, disorganized, and based on outdated assumptions about international power. Many Russian officials believed Japan to be a lesser nation and dismissed its military potential. Such arrogance proved costly. Russia's refusal to withdraw its troops from Manchuria after the Boxer Rebellion and its continued interference in Korean affairs alarmed Japanese leaders, who viewed Korea as essential to national security. Japan attempted diplomatic compromise, proposing that Russia recognize Japanese interests in Korea in exchange for Japanese recognition of Russia's position in Manchuria. Russia prolonged negotiations, believing Japan would back down. Instead, Japan prepared for war. The opening strike at Port Arthur. On the night of February 8, 1904, Japan launched a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian fleet anchored at Port Arthur. The strike disabled several key ships and trapped the Russian Navy within the harbor. Soon afterward, Japan formally declared war and began landing troops in Korea, pushing north into Manchuria. The opening phase of the conflict demonstrated the sharp contrast between the two empires. Japan acted swiftly, decisively, and according to carefully developed strategy, while Russia reacted slowly and with hesitation. The Siege of Port Arthur. The Siege of Port Arthur, which lasted from August 1904 to January 1905, was one of the most intense and destructive engagements of the war. Japanese forces, commanded by General Nogi Muresuke, launched repeated assaults on the Russian fortifications. The conflict quickly devolved into brutal trench warfare involving barbed wire, machine gun fire, and massive artillery bombardment, tactics that would later define the First World War. After months of heavy losses on both sides, the Japanese succeeded in capturing the high ground overlooking the harbor. Recognizing that continued resistance was futile, the Russian commander surrendered the fortress on January 2, 1905. Many Russians criticized the decision, arguing that the surrender occurred too soon. But regardless of interpretation, the fall of Port Arthur marked a decisive moment in the war. Japan had effectively eliminated Russia's presence in the region and gained control of a critical strategic position. Battles in Manchuria, Liaoyang, and Mukden. While the siege took place, large land battles unfolded in the interior of Manchuria. One of the earliest major engagements occurred at Liaoyang in the late summer of 1904. Although Russia possessed superior numbers, poor coordination and indecisive leadership led to its retreat. The Japanese victory, though costly, strengthened morale and further weakened Russia's strategic foothold. The largest conflict of the war, the Battle of Mukden in early 1905, involved more than 500,000 troops. Over the course of several weeks, Japanese forces executed a vast flanking maneuver, forcing Russian troops to withdraw northward. Although the Russian army was not destroyed entirely, the psychological and strategic damage was immense. The defeat at Mukden signaled that Russian victory was no longer possible. The naval decisive moment, Tsushima. Russia's final effort to salvage the war came through its decision to send the Baltic Fleet halfway around the world to reinforce its naval presence. The fleet's journey was plagued with misfortune, low morale, and diplomatic embarrassments, including the accidental firing on British fishing boats, nearly provoking a new international conflict. When the fleet finally reached the waters between Korea and Japan in May 1905, it encountered the Japanese Navy under Admiral Togo Heihachiro. During the Battle of Tsushima, Japan demonstrated superior training, communication, and naval maneuvering. Nearly the entire Russian fleet was sunk or captured. The defeat was complete and undeniable. Russia could no longer continue the war. Domestic and global consequences for Russia. Russia's defeat had profound consequences at home. The war exposed corruption, disorganization, and incompetence within the government and military. Public anger erupted into widespread protests, strikes, and political revolt. In January 1905, as the war was still ongoing, peaceful protesters in St. Petersburg were fired upon in an event later known as Bloody Sunday. This incident ignited the revolution of 1905, which resulted in mass uprisings across the empire. To restore order, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to create the Duma, Russia's first national legislative assembly. Although its powers were limited, the Duma symbolized a weakening of autocratic rule. The unrest triggered by the war did not fade. Instead, it continued to smolder until it erupted again more violently in the Russian Revolution of 1917, ultimately ending the Romanov dynasty. Japan's new role and rising ambition. Japan emerged from the war recognized internationally as a major power. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, acknowledged Japan's dominance over Korea and transferred Russia's holdings in southern Manchuria to Japanese control. While Japan did not receive the financial reparations it had hoped for, the symbolic value of defeating a European empire was immense. The war reinforced Japan's national confidence and strengthened the prestige of its military leadership. However, the victory also contributed to a sense of entitlement and imperial destiny that later shaped Japan's expansionist policies. By 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, beginning decades of harsh rule. The belief that Japan was destined to lead and reshape Asia grew stronger, eventually contributing to the militarism of the 1930s and Japan's role in World War II. Impact on global power and anti-colonial movements. The psychological impact of the war extended far beyond Russia and Japan. Across Asia and Africa, the conflict became a symbol of possibility. Colonized peoples saw that European dominance was not inevitable. Indian nationalists, Vietnamese revolutionaries, Chinese reformers, and African intellectuals looked to Japan as proof that modernization and resistance could challenge imperial rule. Meanwhile, European governments were forced to reconsider assumptions about racial superiority and global order. Although many Western observers attempted to attribute Russia's defeat to internal problems, rather than recognizing Japan's strength, the geopolitical reality had shifted. The war marked the beginning of a new era in which power could no longer be understood solely in terms of European dominance. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of the Russo-Japanese War, a conflict that reshaped global power and changed the course of the 20th century. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and learned something new, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and keep exploring history.